The morning sun had just started to rise above the small town, painting the rooftops gold. Inside a tiny cafe on the corner of Maple Street, a young girl moved quickly between the tables, balancing plates and coffee cups. Her hands were small, her shoes worn out, and her apron slightly too big for her thin frame, but there was something special in her eyes, something bright and unshaken, even though life had never been kind to her. Her name was Lila. She was only 19, yet her shoulders carried more weight than most could imagine. Her mother was sick and couldn't work anymore, and the bills piled up faster than Lila could count. Every coin she earned at the cafe went straight home, to medicine, rent, and food. She didn't have time for fancy things or friends, but she had one secret joy, something that gave her strength when the world felt heavy. Music. In the corner of the cafe stood an old piano. It hadn't been played in years, its surface covered with dust and coffee stains. Most customers didn't even notice it anymore. But every night, when the cafe closed and the streets went quiet, Lila would sit on the stool and softly touch the keys. They were stiff, some slightly out of tune, but to her it was perfect. Each note carried her dreams. She would play gentle melodies she remembered from the radio, or from passing musicians she once heard in the park. Sometimes she'd hum along, imagining herself on a big stage, performing under glowing lights before an audience that truly listened. But dreams don't pay bills, and Lila knew that. So every morning she tied her apron and smiled at customers who never learned her name. Still, no matter how hard her day was, she never lost her kindness. She served coffee with a smile, greeted strangers warmly, and even when tips were small, she said thank you like she meant it. People liked her without realizing why. It was her warmth, her quiet hope that somehow made the world around her feel lighter. Across the street from the cafe stood a grand hotel. It was the pride of the town, with shining windows and elegant guests who came from far away. Lila often looked through the glass doors as she passed by, seeing men in fine suits and women in sparkling dresses. There, inside the hotel's golden hall, was where a famous pianist often performed. His name was Mr. Grant, a man of great success and even greater pride. He was known across the country for his flawless technique and his wealth. People said he was born with a gift and a silver spoon. He traveled in private cars, stayed in five-star hotels, and played for audiences who could afford the expensive tickets. To Lila, he was a distant dream, someone living in another world entirely. But she admired him deeply. When she passed by the hotel, she could sometimes hear his music drifting through the open windows. The notes felt alive, powerful, full of emotion. She would stop and listen until someone called her name or until the sound faded away. Each time she whispered quietly to herself, "One day I'll play like that." But deep down she didn't really believe it. Dreams like that weren't made for girls like her. One chilly evening, as she finished her shift, the cafe owner sighed. "The storm's getting worse tonight," he said. "Be careful on your way home." Lila nodded and began cleaning the tables. Outside, rain poured hard and thunder rolled in the distance. Most of the customers had already left, except for a few travelers who waited for the storm to calm down. The lights flickered once, then again. Suddenly, the entire cafe went dark. There were gasps and murmurs as people pulled out their phones for light. The owner rushed to the back, trying to check the fuses, but nothing worked. "It's the whole block," someone said. "The power's out." Lila stood near the counter, watching the restless crowd. Some were complaining, others impatiently tapping on their tables. The cozy cafe suddenly felt cold and uncomfortable. She looked around, and then her eyes landed on the old piano in the corner. For a moment, she hesitated. She had never played in front of so many people. But something inside her whispered, why not? Maybe it could help pass the time. Maybe it could calm everyone down. She took a deep breath, walked to the piano, and gently lifted the cover. The stool creaked as she sat down. The rain outside beat against the windows, and the room was filled with the low hum of conversation. Then she pressed a single key. It rang softly through the darkness. Slowly, she began to play. At first, her fingers trembled, but then the music took over. The melody was simple and quiet, like a lullaby for the storm. Conversations faded one by one until only the piano remained. The sound filled the room, wrapping around everyone like warmth on a cold night. Some people closed their eyes. Others just listened, surprised that such beauty could come from an old, forgotten piano. Among the crowd sat a man in a dark coat near the back, unnoticed. He had come to the cafe only because his car had broken down in the storm. He was supposed to be resting before his big performance at the hotel the next day. His name, Mr. Grant. He watched the girl closely, his eyes narrowing as he listened. Her technique was unpolished and she missed a few notes, but there was something in her playing that caught him off guard. It was real. It wasn't the kind of performance that aimed to impress, it was one that came straight from the heart. When she finished, the cafe was silent for a moment. Then a few people clapped softly. The light from a customer's phone showed Lila's shy smile. She stood up quickly, embarrassed, and murmured, "Sorry if that was too loud." But the owner smiled and said, "You just saved the evening." Mr. Grant didn't move. He stayed seated, thinking. When the lights finally came back on, he stood and walked toward the counter. The rain had stopped and the air smelled of wet pavement. He looked at the girl, who was now wiping tables again, pretending nothing had happened. "Was that you playing?" he asked, his voice calm but deep. Lila froze, turning slowly. "Oh, yes," she said quietly. "Just something I do for fun." "You play by ear?" he asked. She nodded. "I never had lessons. My mom used to hum songs when I was little, and I tried to find them on the piano. That's how I learned." He studied her for a moment. She looked tired but peaceful, her apron still wet from the rain. "You have something," he finally said. "Something you can't be taught." She blinked, unsure how to respond. "Thank you, sir," she whispered. He left without another word, and she didn't think much of it. Just another kind stranger, she thought. But that night Mr. Grant couldn't sleep. Her music had stayed with him, soft, pure, unpolished, but deeply alive. He had spent years perfecting his skill, but somewhere along the way he had lost that innocence, that raw emotion she carried in every note. The next morning, Lila woke up early, as always. She made tea for her mother, then headed to work. The rain had cleared, and the streets glistened under the morning light. As she passed the hotel, she saw a crowd gathering outside. A poster hung near the entrance announcing a charity concert that evening, Mr. Grant's final performance before leaving the city. She paused, staring at it for a long moment. How she wished she could go, just to sit in the back and hear him play live. But the tickets cost more than she earned in a week. She sighed and turned away, continuing down the street. That evening, the cafe was busy again. Lila worked quietly, serving customers, cleaning tables, and occasionally glancing toward the window. She didn't know that someone across the street was watching her from the hotel lobby, the same man who had heard her play in the dark cafe. Mr. Grant had made a decision. Something about that girl's courage and her love for music had stirred something in him. After all his fame and fortune, he had forgotten what music was really about. Feeling, not perfection. And for the first time in years, he wanted to do something spontaneous. That night, as Lila wiped down the last table and prepared to leave, the cafe door opened. The cold night air rushed in, and there stood Mr. Grant, the famous pianist, in his dark coat once again. Everyone in the cafe turned to look, whispering his name. Lila froze, not believing her eyes. He smiled faintly and said, "You played beautifully last night." She stood still, speechless, her heart pounding. Then he added quietly, "I have a concert tonight. I'd like you to come." The room fell silent. She looked around, thinking it must be a joke. "Me?" she asked softly. He nodded. "Yes, you." And that was the moment everything began to change. The air inside the cafe turned still. Everyone's eyes followed the man standing at the door. His coat was damp from the rain and his shoes carried the weight of long travels. But there was no doubt about who he was. Even those who didn't care much for music knew his face. The famous pianist, the millionaire who played for kings and queens, was standing right there, looking at the poor waitress with calm, serious eyes. Lila could hardly breathe. Her hands were still holding a tray, and her heart felt like it had stopped. It didn't make sense. Why would someone like him come here? Why would he speak to her? A cafe worker who could barely afford a new pair of shoes. The owner hurried over, wiping his hands nervously on his apron. "Sir, what an honor. Would you like a table? A drink, perhaps?" "Mr." Grant shook his head slightly. His eyes stayed on Lila. "No, thank you. I came to speak with her." The room grew quiet again. Some customers pretended to read their menus. Others leaned forward, curious. Lila set the tray down carefully, her fingers trembling. Me, she stuttered. Yes, you, he said softly, stepping closer. I remember your playing last night. You played in the dark, without fear. That's rare. Lila's cheeks turned pink. I wasn't trying to be brave. I just wanted everyone to feel better. He smiled faintly. That's exactly what music should do. He paused for a moment, then said, I'm performing tonight at the Grand Hall. It's my last concert in this city. I'd like you to come. The cafe owner's mouth fell open. She? To your concert? Mr. Grant nodded. Yes, as my guest. Lila shook her head immediately. Sir, I can't. I work till late, and I don't have the kind of clothes for such a place. He looked at her calmly. That's not important. Music doesn't care what you wear. Be there. Then he handed her a small envelope with an invitation card inside. Before she could say another word, he turned and walked out, leaving the whole cafe speechless. For a long moment, no one moved. The owner finally broke the silence. Do you realize who that was? Lila nodded slowly, still staring at the envelope in her hand. I do. When she got home that night, her mother was sitting near the window, knitting quietly. The small lamp cast a warm light across the room. You're home late, sweetheart, her mother said gently. Long day? Lila nodded, setting down her bag. Something strange happened. She told her mother everything, about playing during the blackout, about the man who came back, and about the invitation to the concert. Her mother listened quietly, smiling faintly. You see, sometimes life surprises us when we least expect it. But Mom, Lila said softly, I can't go. Look at me. I don't belong in a place like that. Those people wear gowns and suits. I'd look foolish. Her mother reached over and took her hand. You've spent your life making others happy, working so hard, giving up your dreams. Maybe, just once, let yourself say yes. Lila looked down, her heart full of fear and hope all at once. She didn't have a fancy dress, but she remembered a plain blue one tucked in her drawer, something she had worn to a school event years ago. It wasn't much, but it was clean. She ironed it that night, her hands shaking as she did. The next evening came faster than she expected. The town glowed under streetlights, and the hotel across the street looked even grander than usual. Cars lined up, and people stepped out wearing glittering clothes. Lila stood near the entrance, holding her small purse, feeling completely out of place. Inside, the grand hall was breathtaking. Golden lights shimmered above a stage covered in velvet curtains. Musicians tuned their instruments while guests took their seats, their laughter echoing softly. Lila found herself a corner near the side aisle, her ticket clutched tightly in her hand. She had never seen anything like it. The smell of polished wood and perfume filled the air. She felt small, almost invisible, but also strangely alive. Then the lights dimmed. The audience grew quiet. A soft murmur spread as Mr. Grant walked on stage, dressed in a black suit that shimmered under the light. The applause was thunderous. He bowed, then sat at the grand piano. His fingers touched the keys and the first notes floated into the air. Strong, perfect, powerful. The audience was mesmerized. Lila sat frozen, her heart rising and falling with every note. She had listened to him before through open windows, but hearing him live was something else entirely. It felt like being inside the music itself. But then something unexpected happened. Halfway through the piece, he stopped playing. The crowd fell silent, confused. He looked up and said into the microphone, Tonight, I met someone who reminded me what music truly means. Someone who plays not for fame, but for feeling. The audience murmured, curious. He turned his gaze toward the side of the hall, toward her. Would the young woman from the cafe please join me on stage? Lila froze. People looked around, whispering. She felt every eye on her. Her face turned pale. Surely, he couldn't mean her. But his eyes found hers again, calm and patient. Her legs felt weak as she stood up. A man near her whispered, Go on, Another smiled encouragingly. Slowly, she walked down the aisle. Her hands were trembling so much she could barely breathe. When she reached the stage, Mr. Grant offered his hand and helped her up. "Don't worry," he whispered, leaning close. "Just play like you did that night. Forget the people. Play from here." He gently tapped his chest. She nodded faintly, her heart pounding in her ears. He began a simple melody, soft and slow. Then he looked at her, giving her a cue. Lila placed her fingers on the keys and followed his lead. Her first few notes were shaky, but then she remembered what he had said. Play for the music, not the people. She closed her eyes. The sound that came next silenced the hall completely. The two pianos sang together, his perfect precision blending with her raw emotion. It was like a conversation between experience and innocence, between fame and faith. When the final note faded, there was a moment of stillness, so deep it almost hurt. Then the entire hall erupted in applause. People stood, clapping, cheering, some even wiping tears from their eyes. Lila sat frozen, tears streaming down her cheeks. She couldn't believe it. Mr. Grant stood, smiling proudly. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "this is what true music sounds like." The applause grew louder. Cameras flashed. Lila could only bow her head, overwhelmed. She had never felt so alive, so free. After the concert, she tried to slip away quietly, but Mr. Grant stopped her backstage. "You did well," he said warmly. "You have a gift, and I mean that." She shook her head, still trembling. "I don't even know what happened. I thought I'd faint up there." He chuckled softly. "You didn't. You reminded everyone, including me, what music really is." She looked up at him, surprised. "You? You're already perfect." He paused, his smile fading a little. "Perfection isn't the same as passion. I lost that long ago. You helped me remember." There was a silence between them, one that didn't need words. He reached into his pocket and handed her a small card. "Come to the academy tomorrow morning. I want to help you learn properly. You deserve that chance." Lila stared at the card as if it were made of gold. She couldn't even speak. When she finally returned home that night, her mother was still awake, waiting by the window. Lila walked in quietly, her eyes red from crying. "How was it?" her mother asked gently. Lila smiled through her tears. "It was everything, Mom. He made me play. On stage, in front of everyone." Her mother's hands flew to her mouth. "You what?" "I don't know how it happened," Lila laughed softly. "But they clapped, Mom. They clapped for me." Her mother's eyes filled with tears as she reached out and hugged her daughter tightly. Outside, the city lights glimmered against the quiet night. For the first time in her life, Lila felt like the world had seen her, not as a poor waitress, but as someone who had something beautiful to give. And though she didn't know what tomorrow would bring, she knew one thing for sure. Her life had just changed forever. The morning after the concert felt unreal. Lila woke up with the sound of her mother's soft voice calling her name. The sunlight slipped through the thin curtains, falling across her face. For a few seconds, she thought it had all been a dream. The stage, the applause, the crowd standing on their feet. But then she saw the small card lying on the table beside her bed. Mr. Grant's invitation. The academy address written neatly on it. Her heart started racing again. Everything had happened so quickly that she barely had time to think. Just 2 nights ago, she was cleaning tables in a cafe. And now a world-famous pianist had told her she had a gift. It felt impossible. Her mother walked in with a cup of tea. "Good morning, sweetheart," she said with a smile. "You didn't sleep much, did you?" Lila shook her head, still holding the card. "I keep thinking maybe it was all a mistake." Her mother sat on the edge of the bed and touched her hand gently. "It wasn't a mistake. He saw something in you, something special. Don't doubt it." Lila smiled faintly but said nothing. She felt both excited and terrified. The idea of going to a music academy scared her more than any crowd. What if she wasn't good enough? What if she embarrassed herself? After breakfast, she dressed in her simplest outfit and tied her hair neatly. She didn't have fancy clothes, but she made sure she looked presentable. Then she took a deep breath, tucked the card into her pocket, and walked toward the academy. It stood on a hill overlooking the city, a large building with tall windows and a long staircase leading to its doors. She stopped for a moment at the gate, her hands trembling. Inside, she could hear faint music echoing through the halls, students practicing, notes blending and rising like birds in the sky. When she finally stepped in, she felt small among the polished floors and shining pianos. A receptionist looked up and asked, "Can I help you?" Lila nodded nervously. "I'm here to see Mr. Grant. He told me to come." The woman's expression softened. "Ah, yes. He's expecting you. Room 204 upstairs to your left." Lila thanked her and walked up the stairs, her heart pounding louder with every step. She found the door slightly open. Inside, Mr. Grant sat at a piano, playing quietly to himself. His back was straight, his hands moving gracefully over the keys. He looked calm, focused, as if the rest of the world didn't exist. She hesitated, not wanting to disturb him. But then he stopped playing and looked up with a faint smile. "You came?" "Yes," she said softly, stepping inside. "I hope I'm not too early." "Not at all," he said, standing up. "Come in." Close the door. The room was bright and filled with instruments, pianos, violins, even a cello in the corner. Sheets of music were scattered on a desk. He gestured for her to sit at the piano. "Let's hear something," he said simply. She froze. "You mean now?" He nodded. "Yes, play something you love. Don't worry about mistakes." Lila took a deep breath and sat down. The piano was smooth and perfectly tuned, unlike the broken one at the cafe. She placed her fingers on the keys and began playing one of the simple tunes she used to hum while working. Her hands shook at first, but soon the familiar melody calmed her. When she finished, there was silence. She looked up nervously. Mr. Grant stood beside her, his face unreadable. Then he said quietly, "You play like someone who feels every note. That can't be taught." Lila's eyes widened. "Really?" He nodded. "But you also need to learn discipline. Technique, timing, expression. You have the heart, but now you must build the hands." She nodded eagerly. "I'll do anything. I'll practice as much as you want," he smiled. "Good. Then we begin tomorrow morning. 7 sharp." Her eyes widened again. 7, as in before sunrise? He chuckled softly. "Music doesn't wait for late risers." She laughed nervously, but agreed. For the first time, she felt like her dream was taking shape. Over the next few weeks, Lila's life completely changed. Every morning before the cafe opened, she hurried to the academy for her lessons. At first, it was difficult. Her fingers cramped, her wrists hurt, and she often grew frustrated when she couldn't keep up with the exercises. "Again," Mr. Grant would say calmly. "Don't rush. Let the music breathe." She respected him deeply. He was strict but patient, never raising his voice, never discouraging her. When she got something wrong, he made her try again until she felt the rhythm inside her bones. Slowly, her hands grew stronger, her confidence steadier. Sometimes, during short breaks, he told her stories about his early years, how he practiced until his fingers bled, how he once failed an important audition, how he had lost his love for music after fame found him. "I played to impress people," he said one afternoon, "but you reminded me that music isn't about perfection. It's about connection." Lila listened quietly, trying to absorb every word. One day, after weeks of practice, he handed her a sheet of music. "This piece," he said, "was the first song I ever performed publicly. I want you to learn it." She studied the notes carefully. "It looks difficult." "It is," he said, smiling slightly. "But I believe you can do it." She practiced day after day, sometimes until her hands were sore. Every evening she returned to the cafe, tired but happy. The other workers noticed her change. She smiled more, her eyes brighter than before. "You've been glowing lately," the cafe owner teased one night. "What's your secret?" She laughed softly. "Just learning something new." He smiled knowingly. "Keep at it. You were meant for more than serving coffee." Word spread slowly through the town about the poor cafe girl who was now studying under the famous pianist. Some people admired her courage. Others whispered that it was just luck. Lila ignored the talk. She knew her heart, and that was enough. One morning, as she was finishing her lesson, Mr. Grant said, "There's a charity event next week. I want you to play with me again." Lila froze. "Play on stage?" He nodded. "Yes, just one piece. It's time you share your music again." Her mind went blank. "But what if I fail?" He looked at her gently. "You won't, because you won't be playing to impress anyone. You'll be playing to give. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, hearing the melody of the song in her head. She practiced quietly the next morning before work, over and over until it felt like part of her heartbeat. The day of the event arrived sooner than she expected. The hall was smaller than the grand concert from before, but still filled with people, doctors, teachers, local families. It was a fundraiser for the children's hospital. Lila stood backstage, her stomach turning with nerves. Mr. Grant approached her, calm as always. "Are you ready?" She nodded faintly. "I think so," he smiled. "Good. Remember what I told you." When they stepped on stage, the lights were bright and the audience clapped softly. Lila sat beside him, her hands trembling. The moment his fingers touched the keys, everything else disappeared. She followed his lead, their music blending perfectly. It wasn't flawless, but it was beautiful. Every note told a story. Her story. When they finished, the room erupted in applause once more. Lila looked out at the crowd, tears in her eyes. She saw her mother sitting in the front row clapping proudly, tears streaming down her face. After the event, children from the hospital came up to thank them. One little girl handed Lila a small drawing of a piano. "You played so nice," the girl said shyly. "When I grow up, I want to play too." Lila knelt down and smiled. "You can. Just never stop believing you can." That night, as they left the hall, Mr. Grant turned to her and said quietly, "You see what you did? That's the power of music. You touched hearts today." Lila smiled through her tears. "I think I finally understand what you meant." He nodded. "Good, because this is only the beginning." As they walked out under the stars, Lila realized something she had never felt before. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just dreaming, she was living her dream. And deep down, she knew that no matter what came next, she would never forget the moment a millionaire believed in a poor girl's song. The next morning felt different. The air carried a strange kind of calm, the kind that comes after something big has happened. The charity performance was over, but the echo of the applause still rang in Lila's ears. She couldn't stop replaying every moment in her mind. The music, the smiling faces, the little girl who said she wanted to play piano too. It all felt like a beautiful dream that had somehow come true. When she arrived at the cafe, her co-workers cheered. "There she is," one of them said proudly. "Our star pianist." Lila blushed, shaking her head. "Oh, stop. It wasn't that big." "It was on the local news," another worker said. "They showed a clip of you playing next to Mr. Grant. Everyone's talking about it." Her cheeks turned pink and she tried to hide her smile. She wasn't used to attention, and part of her still felt like the same poor girl cleaning tables. But deep inside, something had changed. For the first time, she felt seen. Not for her job, not for her struggles, but for her music, for something she had carried quietly in her heart all those years. Later that day, Mr. Grant came by the cafe. He didn't walk in like a celebrity. He entered quietly like a regular person. Lila looked up from behind the counter, surprised. "You're here?" He smiled faintly. "I thought I'd get a cup of coffee. Maybe see how my student is doing." She laughed softly. "I think you already know." He took a seat at his usual corner table and she brought him his drink. When she set it down, he said, "You handled yourself well last night. Most people would have frozen. I almost did," she admitted. "But then I thought about what you said. To play for the music, not the people." He nodded. "That's something even professionals forget." There was a pause. Lila looked at him curiously. "Why me?" she asked. "Why did you help me? You could have chosen anyone." He stirred his coffee slowly before answering. "Because when I saw you play that night during the blackout, I saw something I'd lost. You reminded me why I started playing in the first place." His words sank deep into her heart. She didn't know how to respond. For someone so famous, he sounded almost lonely. He finished his coffee and stood. "There's a music scholarship coming up next month," he said. "It's competitive, but I think you should apply. If you win, you'll get a place at the National Conservatory." Lila froze. "Me? That's impossible." "Nothing's impossible," he said firmly. "You have talent. Now you just need courage." That night she told her mother about the scholarship. Her mother smiled proudly but also looked worried. "That's a big step, dear. Are you ready for that kind of world?" "I don't know," Lila whispered. "But I want to try." The following weeks were the hardest of her life. She practiced every spare moment. Early mornings, late nights, even short breaks during her cafe shifts. Her fingers ached, but she didn't stop. Mr. Grant guided her through every piece, pushing her to reach higher. One day, during practice, she grew frustrated and slammed her hands on the keys. "I can't do it. My fingers don't move fast enough." He watched her quietly before saying, "You're thinking too much. Stop trying to impress the piano. Let it speak with you." She looked at him, confused. "What does that even mean?" He smiled slightly. "You'll understand when you stop forcing it." And slowly she did. Over time, her playing became smoother, her emotions flowing naturally into each note. It was no longer about being perfect. It was about being honest. The day of the audition finally came. The conservatory hall was enormous, filled with students carrying sheet music and nerves. Lila sat in the waiting area, clutching her piano pieces tightly. Her heart felt like it was about to burst out of her chest. When her name was called, she stood and walked toward the stage. The judges sat behind a long table, expressionless. The piano gleamed under the lights, waiting for her. She took a deep breath and began to play. At first her hands trembled, but then the music took control. She poured every piece of her story into the notes. The long nights at the cafe, her mother's soft voice, the kindness of a man who believed in her. The room grew still. When she finished, she kept her eyes closed, afraid to look up. Then softly, one of the judges said, "Thank you." She bowed and left the stage, unsure if she had done well or not. Outside, she found Mr. Grant waiting by the door. "How do you feel?" he asked. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I just played what I felt." He nodded with approval. "That's all that matters." A week later, she received a letter in the mail. Her hand shook as she opened it. Inside, in bold letters, it read, "Congratulations. You have been accepted into the National Music Conservatory." She screamed so loudly that her mother came running. "What happened?" Lila laughed and cried at the same time. "I got in, Mom, I got in." They hugged tightly, both crying tears of joy. It felt like every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every note she had ever played had led to this moment. Mr. Grant came by later that day, smiling proudly when she showed him the letter. "I knew you would," he said simply. "I can't thank you enough," she said softly. "You changed everything for me." He looked at her, his expression gentle. "No, you changed it yourself. I just gave you a small push." Over the next few months, Lila's life took a new turn. She started classes at the conservatory, surrounded by talented students from all over the country. At first, she felt out of place again. Many of them had trained since childhood, had private tutors, and owned expensive instruments. But when she played, they listened. Her music was different. It wasn't polished like theirs, but it had soul. And soon even the strictest teachers began to notice her. Sometimes she would visit the cafe on weekends. The old piano was still there, waiting for her. She'd play a few soft tunes for the customers, who would smile and say, "It's not the same without you here." One afternoon, Mr. Grant stopped by her practice room at the conservatory. "How's life treating you?" he asked. She grinned. "It's harder than I thought, but I love it." He nodded approvingly. "Good, hard work keeps you humble. Never forget where you came from." She looked down at her hands, remembering the nights when they were red from scrubbing tables instead of playing keys. "I never will," she said quietly. Then, after a short pause, she added, "You know, I still play that same melody I played during the blackout. It reminds me of how everything began." He smiled warmly. "Don't ever stop playing that one. It's your truth." Their lessons continued for several months until one day, he told her he would be traveling abroad for a new project. "It's time you start standing on your own," he said. "You don't need me anymore." Her heart sank. "But I still have so much to learn from you." "You'll keep learning," he said gently. "But now you must trust yourself." Before leaving, he handed her a small box. Inside was a golden keychain in the shape of a piano. "To remind you of where you started," he said. She smiled through tears. "Thank you for everything." He nodded, his voice soft. "Promise me one thing. When you're on a big stage one day and people ask where it all began, tell them it started with a song played in the dark." "I promise," she whispered. When he left, she stood by the window for a long time, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The world outside was changing, and so was she. That night, Lila sat at her piano alone in the quiet practice room. She placed her fingers on the keys and began to play the same melody she had played on that rainy night in the cafe, the same song that had caught the attention of a millionaire and changed her fate. As the notes filled the air, she smiled. It wasn't just music anymore. It was her story, her life, and her journey. And deep down she knew this was only the beginning of something even greater. The months passed quickly and life at the conservatory became Lila's new reality. Every day began before sunrise. She'd walk through the tall iron gates, her backpack filled with sheet music, and join other students rushing to their classes. The sound of music floated through the halls. Violins practicing scales, singers warming up, pianos echoing from every corner. At first, Lila felt small among them. Everyone seemed to know more, play faster, and read music better than she could. But instead of feeling discouraged, she let their skill push her harder. When others rested, she stayed behind to practice. When others went out, she sat by the piano until her fingers grew sore. One night, her roommate peeked into the practice room. "You're still here?" she asked, half asleep. Lila smiled tiredly. "Just one more try," her friend laughed softly. "You always say that." But Lila knew she couldn't stop. Every note she played reminded her of how far she had come. From a small cafe with broken tables to this grand conservatory where dreams were born. And every day she thought of Mr. Grant. Even though he was miles away, his voice still echoed in her head whenever she doubted herself. Play for the music, not for the people. Weeks later, the conservatory announced something big, an annual music competition. The winner would receive a special performance opportunity with the National Orchestra and a feature on television. It was the kind of chance that could change a musician's life forever. Lila hesitated at first. The competition was fierce, with students from all over the country preparing months in advance. She was just beginning to find her footing, but then she remembered what Mr. Grant once told her. Nothing's impossible if your heart is in it. So she signed up. When the list of participants was posted, whispers followed her in the hallways. Some of the students who came from wealthy families smirked. "The cafe girls competing?" one of them said. "This should be interesting." She ignored the comments, but they stung a little. That night, she sat at her piano long after the building had emptied. The moonlight spilled through the window and she began to play softly, letting the music carry her pain and hope together. Her teacher at the conservatory, an older woman who had seen her progress since the beginning, stopped by the door and listened quietly. When Lila finished, she said, "You have something most students don't, Hart. Don't let anyone take that away from you." The following weeks were intense. She practiced every day, perfecting her chosen piece, a complex sonata that tested both skill and emotion. Sometimes her fingers stumbled, but she refused to quit. She'd record herself, listen, and start over. Meanwhile, messages from Mr. Grant began arriving again. He was in Europe, performing in various cities, but he always found time to send her short notes. "Keep pushing forward," one said. "Great music comes from truth, not perfection," said another. His words gave her strength. She taped one of his letters inside her music notebook as a reminder. The day of the competition arrived. The grand auditorium was packed. Rows of judges sat at a long table, and students waited backstage, nervously adjusting their clothes and instruments. Lila stood quietly in a corner, holding her sheet music close. Her heart pounded like a drum. When her turn came, she took a deep breath and stepped into the light. The room fell silent. She could feel hundreds of eyes watching her, but she focused only on the piano. She placed her hands gently on the keys and began to play. At first, her hands trembled, but soon the music took over. The melody rose and fell like waves, each note filled with emotion, her struggles, her gratitude, her quiet victories. The world around her disappeared. There was only her and the piano. When she finished, there was a long pause. Then slowly applause filled the room. It wasn't the loudest or longest, but it was sincere. She stood, bowed, and walked off stage, her chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. Backstage, a few other students looked at her differently now. Some even smiled. One came up and said softly, "That was beautiful." She smiled back, whispering, "Thank you." The results were announced that evening. Everyone gathered in the main hall, hearts pounding. One by one, names were called. Third place went to a violinist from another city. Second place went to a pianist known for his speed. Then the host paused before saying, "And first place goes to Lila from Class B." For a second, she thought she heard wrong. Then the room erupted in applause. Her friends hugged her, shouting in excitement. Tears welled up in her eyes as she walked to the stage to accept the award. The judges shook her hand, one of them saying, "Your music came from the soul." "That's rare." That night, Lila sat alone outside the conservatory, holding her trophy under the stars. She looked up, smiling, and whispered, "I wish you could see this, Mr. Grant." The next morning, she received an unexpected message. It was from him. "I saw the news. I'm proud of you," it read. "You didn't just play music, and you told your story." She smiled through tears. "You were right," she murmured. It really was about truth. Soon after the competition, she was invited to perform with the National Orchestra. It was her first real professional stage. Elegant lights, hundreds of people, cameras, and a grand piano waiting at the center. Before the show, as she stood backstage adjusting her dress, she felt a familiar voice behind her. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." She turned, shocked. Mr. Grant stood there, smiling warmly. "You came?" She whispered, almost in disbelief. "I told you I wanted to hear your truth again," he said. "Now's the perfect time." Tears filled her eyes. "You have no idea how much this means to me." He placed a hand on her shoulder. "You earned every bit of this. Go out there and remind them why music matters." She nodded, wiping her tears. The lights dimmed and she stepped onto the stage. The hall was silent except for the soft hum of the crowd settling down. She sat at the piano, looked out at the audience, and spotted him sitting in the front row. He gave her a small nod, the same reassuring look he gave her back in the cafe. She took a deep breath and began to play. The melody filled the hall, deep and pure. The orchestra joined in, wrapping her music with soft harmonies. It was powerful yet tender, carrying a story of struggle, hope, and gratitude. As the last note faded, the audience rose to their feet, clapping thunderously. Cameras flashed. People cheered. Lila bowed deeply, tears glistening in her eyes. After the performance, reporters surrounded her. One asked, "Your story has inspired so many. What message do you want to share?" She smiled softly and said, "That no dream is too far if someone believes in you, even if that someone is just yourself." Later backstage, Mr. Grant handed her a small envelope. Inside was a letter of recommendation for an international music fellowship in Vienna. "I think it's time you take your music to the world," he said. Her heart swelled with gratitude. "You've done so much for me. I don't know how to repay you." He smiled gently. "You already have. Seeing you up there, and that's more than enough." As the night ended, they sat together in the empty hall. The lights dimmed except for the soft glow on the piano. "Do you remember the first time I heard you play?" he asked quietly. "How could I forget?" she said with a smile. "It was the night everything began." He nodded. "You were scared, but your music spoke louder than fear." "It still does." She looked down at her hands. The same hands that once cleaned tables now played in front of thousands. "Sometimes I still can't believe all this is real," she whispered. "It's real," he said softly. "Because you never gave up." The hall fell silent again, and for a moment it felt just like that night in the cafe. One piano, one dream, and two people who understood what music truly meant. The next few months passed in a blur of travel, rehearsals, and new beginnings. Lila's life had changed more than she ever imagined. Her days were now filled with performances, interviews, and invitations to play at places she had only seen in pictures. The small cafe that once felt like her entire world now seemed like a memory, but a memory she carried deep in her heart. Even with all the fame, she never forgot where it started. Every time she sat at a grand piano, surrounded by bright lights and hundreds of faces, she still felt like that same girl who played under dim cafe bulbs, hoping someone would listen. And she always remembered the man who did. Mr. Grant had gone back to his tours, performing across Europe, but they still spoke often. Sometimes it was a simple message, other times a call late at night when she felt unsure or tired. He never told her what to play anymore. Instead, he always asked, "What does your heart want to say today?" One evening, while packing her things after a concert, her phone buzzed. It was a message from him. "I'm back in town for a few weeks. Let's meet." The next day, she met him at a quiet park. The air was crisp and autumn leaves covered the ground in shades of gold and brown. He looked older, a little more tired, but His eyes still had that calm kindness she had always admired. "You've been busy," he said with a smile as they sat on a bench. "So have you," she replied softly. He chuckled. "Maybe, but I've been following your performances. You've grown, Lila. Your music has something different now. It carries peace," she smiled shyly. "I learned that from you. You told me once that music isn't about showing skill. It's about sharing what's inside. I finally understand what that means." They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the rustling leaves. Then he said, "There's something I wanted to tell you. I'm retiring soon." Her smile faded. "Retiring? You can't. The world needs your music." He looked down at his hands. "The world has new voices now. Yours is one of them." For a moment she didn't know what to say. The thought of him not playing anymore felt strange, like a part of music itself was fading away. "I wanted you to be the first to know," he continued. "I'm organizing a final concert, one last performance before I step away. And I want you to play beside me." Her eyes widened. "Me?" He nodded. "You. I can't imagine ending this journey without the person who reminded me why I started in the first place." She felt tears forming. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," he said gently. She nodded, unable to speak. The concert was scheduled 2 months later at the city's largest hall. News spread quickly. People called it the Final Symphony. Tickets sold out within days. Musicians, critics, and fans from all over came to witness it. Lila threw herself into preparation. Every day she practiced for hours, determined to make it perfect. But more than that, she wanted to make it meaningful, something that would honor everything he had taught her. The night of the concert arrived. Backstage was buzzing with energy. She could hear the audience outside, a low hum of excitement. When she peeked through the curtain, she saw the entire hall glowing under golden lights. Mr. Grant was sitting calmly in his dressing room, adjusting his cufflinks. He looked up when she entered. "Nervous?" he asked with a knowing smile. "A little," she admitted. "That's good," he said. "It means you care." She sat beside him. "How are you feeling?" He took a deep breath. "At peace. I've played all my life, but tonight feels special. Maybe because I'm sharing it with someone who understands." When it was time, they walked together toward the stage. The crowd rose in applause the moment they appeared. The lights dimmed, and the two pianos stood side by side under a single spotlight. Mr. Grant began the first piece, a slow, emotional melody that told stories of years gone by. Lila joined in, her notes weaving around his like old friends reunited. Their music flowed together seamlessly, two souls, two generations, speaking the same language without words. Halfway through, something happened that no one expected. Mr. Grant paused, lifted his hands from the keys, and looked at Lila. "Take it from here," he whispered. She froze for a moment, then nodded. Her fingers moved on their own, carrying the melody forward. The music swelled, filling the hall with warmth. It was soft and powerful, fragile yet unbreakable. And as she played, she felt everything: gratitude, love, sadness, joy, all blending into sound. When she finished, the room fell into silence. Then the audience rose, clapping so hard it echoed off the walls. Some were crying. Mr. Grant stood and bowed, his eyes glistening. "Thank you," he said to the crowd, then turned to her. "And thank you for reminding me what music means." After the show, they sat together in the empty hall. The lights were dim and the stage felt peaceful again. "You know," he said quietly, "when I first met you, I thought I was helping you. But in truth, you helped me find myself again." She shook her head. "You gave me everything: guidance, courage, hope. Without you, I'd still be cleaning tables, dreaming about a life I'd never have." He smiled. "You would have found your way with or without me. You have something rare, a soul that doesn't quit." They talked for hours, laughing and remembering the journey, from that rainy night in the cafe to this grand farewell. As the night drew to a close, he stood up slowly. "Promise me something," he said. "Anything," she replied. "When you play, always remember why you started. Don't let fame or fear take that from you." "I promise," she said softly. He smiled, then handed her a small envelope. "For your next chapter." She opened it and found a ticket, one way to Vienna. "You still think I should go?" she asked. "I don't think," he said with a gentle smile. "I know." A month later, Lila boarded a plane to Vienna. As she looked out the window, the city lights below faded into clouds. Her heart was heavy but also full. She wasn't leaving behind her past. She was carrying it with her. Vienna was everything she dreamed of. Cobblestone streets, music drifting through open windows, and people who lived and breathed art. She studied under great teachers, performed in historic halls, and began composing her own music. Melodies inspired by her journey. By her mother, by the cafe, and by the man who believed in her. Years went by. Her name began to appear on posters, newspapers, and music magazines. Critics called her the girl with the golden heart. She smiled every time she heard that because she knew where that heart came from. One evening, after a concert in Paris, she received a letter. The handwriting was familiar but shakier than before. It was from Mr. Grant. It read, "I'm proud of you always. The world is listening now. Keep telling your story through your music. And remember, I'll always be in the notes you play." She read the letter over and over, her eyes wet with tears. She wished she could tell him how much his belief had changed her life. A few months later, she received news that he had passed away peacefully. For a long time, she just sat by her piano in silence, holding the letter in her hands. Then she began to play, softly at first, then stronger. It was the same song she played during the blackout years ago, the one that brought them together. The melody filled the room, and even though he was gone, she felt him there, in every note, every breath, every pause. From that day forward, she played that song at every concert, always as her final piece. People didn't know its story, but they felt something every time. And every time she played it, she smiled to herself and whispered, "This is for you." Years later, Lila returned to her hometown. The cafe was still there, though quieter now. The piano sat in the same corner, a little worn, a little out of tune. She ran her fingers across the keys and laughed softly. A young waitress approached her. "Excuse me, miss," she said politely. "Are you the pianist everyone talks about?" Lila smiled. "I used to be the waitress here, just like you." The girl's eyes widened. "Really?" "Yes," she said. "And one night someone believed in me when no one else did." The girl looked at the old piano curiously. "Would you play something?" Lila sat down and began to play the familiar melody once more. The sound filled the small cafe, warm and full of life. People stopped talking and turned to listen. When she finished, the room was silent for a few seconds before applause broke out. Just like all those years ago. She stood, smiled at the young waitress, and said, "Never stop dreaming. Sometimes one song can change everything." Then she looked at the piano one last time, her eyes filled with gratitude. Because even though her journey had taken her across the world, it had all started right there. With one song, one moment, and one person who believed.